Good morning, my name is Nigel Dudley. I'm with WCPA, and in this context I've been working with Penny, Annabelle, Tom and others on this particular aspect of key biodiversity areas. And we're going to do three things over the next hour and a half. We're going to have a very brief introduction to this part of the KBA development from myself and from Jessica, but mainly from Jessica Butcher, who will come up and speak in a minute. Then we're going to hear from 6 distinguished panelists responding to the user survey, and then we're going to throw the floor open for discussion. And during the discussion period, I'll be sitting in the back and capturing points on the PowerPoint as we go, so we'll have a living record of what we're doing. We're also, I think we're filming, and I don't know if we're live streaming this or not, but basically what we're here to do today is to launch this report. We only have limited copies, we're having a full printed copy in the new year, which is application of key biodiversity areas, end user consultations. I guess everyone knows what key biodiversity areas are, but just in case anyone doesn't, I'll just summarize. They are areas of particular importance to biodiversity, but identified using a standardized criteria. And IUCN and partners have been working on the development of this criteria over a number of years. Very, very complex process, as you might imagine. And Penny Langhammer and colleagues produced an initial document quite a number of years ago now. There's been a long process of development, and there's a near final text out for discussion at the moment. But as part of that process, IUCN has run an end-user consultation. I think this is probably the most detailed consultation process that IUCN has ever run. So it's quite exciting, even apart from the subject matter. It's quite interesting that the unions put so much effort into finding out responses to issues, to something even during its development. We started with a framing workshop in Cambridge a few years ago, which several people here were present at. And as part of that, we identified a typology of interest groups, user groups, that we should talk to and confer with during the development process. And that has led up to a series of consultations around the world. You can see the little dots on the map. And that involves both bilateral meetings, local conferences, major conferences, opportunities to ask people what they thought. The end result is this report. And well, I would say the interim result is this report, because we're also using the results so far to do a more detailed end-user questionnaire that Jessica will be describing in a minute. So we've had quite a long process of development, thinking, talking. And in Cambridge, we spent some time in a small group of stakeholders identifying user groups. And I'll just summarize briefly. We felt that it was important to talk people at the global and regional phase, and that was everything from intergovernmental treaties through to donor groups, multinational companies that might be using KBAs, international conservation and development NGOs, and sort of global assessment. So the global users. And then also national and subnational users, governments, cultural, spiritual groups, NGOs, communities. Very, very wide range of different user groups that might be using KBAs. And all of those will be using them in slightly different ways. Some will be using to identify areas that would be more or less acceptable to carry out development work or industrial work. Some will be using them to identify potential protected areas. Some indigenous groups have used KBAs as a way of raising the profile of their own land. So many different users have been using the concept in different ways, even as it's being developed. So this initial list was quite important just to lay out the ground, the field of what we were looking at. And with that, I'm going to pass on to Jessica to describe the process itself.
Thanks, Nigel. And obviously we have this diverse panel here who will go into more detail about some of the end uses themselves. So just a little bit more detail about the process. As Nigel said, there were over 28 consultation processes all over the world, 11 different regions, speaking to over 300 participants. So this has been quite the process over the last few years. Following from the framing workshop that Nigel mentioned were 3 technical workshops. So the next one in this series was a criteria and delineation workshop, which happened in 2013. And after that, there was a governance workshop, and following that was a thresholds workshop. So the detailed reports from these sort of technical expert workshops are available online at the Joint Task Force website if you guys are interested in more details about that. So that led to the 27 end user interviews that Nigel mentioned. We used the typology of end users from the framing workshop to sort of do an opportunistic snapshot of different end users, and we'll hear more from these guys on the panel here, and please do have a look at the report. It's quite interesting to see how varied the uses of KVAs are, and we used the results from these 27 interviews. You can see a snapshot of who we were able to speak to inform this end user questionnaire, which is online at www.kvaconsultation.org. So the draft methodology of the standard itself is open for consultation, as Nigel said, and then this sort of 17 questions, quite quick. It should take you under 10 minutes if you want to provide more input. These were the really sort of interesting, both unanimous and non-unanimous issues. So in some cases, and we may find this with the panel, some people's needs are other people's fears, and so we need to find a way to sort of balance and reconcile these challenges. We also ask the same 5 open-ended questions that we asked during the interviews. At the bottom of the questionnaire, it's optional. If you'd like to provide that, there's sort of open text boxes to provide more information. So those questions are things like, what do you need from KVAs? What tools and products would be of most use to you to inform your decision-making in your work? How does it align with your current procedures or upcoming procedures and policies in your institutions? Do you have any fears or concerns about the process or its application? And what are your main recommendations? What are the implications for how the KVA standard is developed? As Nigel mentioned, this is an iterative process, and we're really keen to get as much input. It really, the definition says it's a sort of pragmatic, applied approach that wants to address end user needs as far as possible. So we'd love to hear from you. Just go back, actually. So just very quickly, it's really hard to sort of give a snapshot of the outcomes of this consultation process, but some of the unanimous points were that everyone wanted a central database that was based on spatial data, and also something really interesting that came up was the inclusion of associated data. So what more can you tell us about the site? What are the management options? What are the ecosystem services if available? So these are sort of additional associated data, what current management is in place at the site. So that's something that came out. Accessibility, and the fact that it needs to be interactive, it needs to be user-friendly, and it needs to be iterative and dynamic. As we know, this data is updated and changes all the time. So those were some of the key implications, but please do go online and have a look. It's quite a thick document, over 100 pages of these 27 interviews. So hope you take a look. So I'll just hand it back to Nigel. He's going to introduce our panel guests, and we'll let them give their sort of take on how they use KVAs, and then we'll open it up to